The black duffel bag was sitting on top of the trash can outside Gate 4 of Millbrook Regional Park, zipped shut, no name on it, just a small white tag looped through the handle with a phone number written in permanent marker and nothing else. Lyle Barton noticed it on his second sweep of the afternoon, around 4:15, when the last of the dog walkers had cleared out and the only sounds left were the wind through the cottonwood trees and the distant hum of the highway 2 blocks east. He was 51 years old, 6 years into his job as a grounds supervisor for the City Parks Division, and he had learned over time that the things people left behind in public spaces told you more about them than they intended. Water bottles and granola wrappers were careless, forgotten jackets were hurried, bags left neatly on top of trash cans were something else. They were deliberate. He set down his equipment and picked it up. Heavy. He could feel the weight shifting inside, something solid moving against the fabric. He did not open it. He found the nearest bench, set the bag down in front of him and dialed the number on the tag. 4 rings. Then a voicemail. A man's voice, professional and unhurried, gave a name: Hargrove Capital Management. Please leave a message for the attention of Mr. Elliot Cross. Lyle left his name, his department, and the park location. He said the bag appeared to be undamaged and that he had logged it in the field record and would secure it in the maintenance office until someone came to collect it. He thanked the voicemail and hung up. His daughter Abby was waiting on the tailgate of his truck in the staff lot, the way she had been every Tuesday and Thursday since she started at Millbrook Elementary in September. She was 9 years old and took after her mother in the way that sometimes caught Lyle off guard on ordinary afternoons, the angle of her jaw when she was concentrating, the way she held a book with both hands like it might float away. She was reading when he got to the truck. She did not look up until he was close enough that his shadow crossed the page. "What's that?" she said, nodding at the duffel bag. "Somebody forgot it. Is there stuff in it? That's not our business." Abby considered this in the way she considered most things, briefly but completely, and then went back to her book. Lyle lifted the bag into the truck bed and went around to the driver's side. He had been raising Abby alone for 3 years. Her mother, Carrie, had died of a brain aneurysm on a Saturday morning in April in the kitchen making coffee. She had been 43 years old. There had been no warning anyone could point to afterward, nothing that would have changed the outcome if they had caught it earlier, and Lyle had spent the better part of 6 months going over the weeks before anyway, looking for the sign he had missed, until a grief counselor told him plainly that he was using guilt as a substitute for control, and that neither one of them was going to help Abby. He had stopped looking after that. There was a child who needed dinner on the table by 6, and a permission slip signed for the fall field trip, and a dad who remembered that she was afraid of thunderstorms and needed the hall light left on. You kept the list and you worked the list, and somewhere in the working of it you kept moving. His brother had offered to take Abby in the months after Carrie died. Lyle had thanked him and declined. Not out of pride exactly, but because Abby was the one thing in his life he understood completely, and he needed that. He needed at least one thing he was certain of. The maintenance office at Millbrook Regional was a squat brick building near the west lot, with a window that looked out over the maintenance yard, and a bulletin board inside covered in laminated park maps, emergency contact sheets, and a faded sign from a city beautification initiative that had been discontinued 4 years ago. Lyle logged the bag in the incident property binder, secured it in the locked cabinet behind the desk, and wrote down the callback number from the tag in the margin of the log entry so he would have it in 2 places. He tried the number again the next morning before his shift, voicemail again. This time he left the address of the maintenance office and said that someone could come by between 8 and 5 Monday through Friday, and that the bag would be held for 30 days per city property policy before being transferred to the municipal lost and found. The call came back 3 hours later, not from the number on the tag but from a different line. A woman identified herself as an assistant at Hargrove Capital Management and said that Mr. Cross was aware of the situation and that someone would be sent to retrieve the bag that afternoon. She asked Lyle to confirm he had not opened it. He said he had not. She thanked him and ended the call. The man who arrived at 2 in the afternoon was not Elliot Cross. He was in his mid-40s, wide through the shoulders, wearing a jacket that was expensive without being flashy, the kind of thing that cost what Lyle made in a month and was designed to look like it cost less. He introduced himself as Vincent Corley, Director of Operations, and said he was there on behalf of Mr. Cross to take possession of the personal property. He extended his hand. Lyle told him politely but clearly that the bag had been logged under the name Elliot Cross, that the number on the tag indicated the same, and that he would need to confirm the identity of whoever he was releasing it to before he could release it. Vincent's expression remained pleasant and controlled. "I'm his Director of Operations," he said again. I handle all of Mr. Cross's personal logistics, I understand, Lyle said. But we're going to need some documentation, or I'm going to need to speak with Mr. Cross directly. There was a pause. Vincent reached into his jacket and produced a business card and a signed letter on Hargrove Capital Management letterhead authorizing him to collect the property. The signature at the bottom of the letter was printed, not handwritten. Lyle looked at it for a moment. He looked at the card. He set both of them on the desk and said he appreciated Vincent coming in and that he would make sure Mr. Cross received the bag as soon as he could confirm a direct authorization. If Mr. Cross wanted to call the parks office, Lyle would make himself available at any time. He thanked Vincent for his patience. Vincent left without the bag. He did not say anything else. But at the door he paused for 2 full seconds before he went out, and that pause told Lyle something he could not have named exactly, but that stayed with him for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, Abby was working on a school project at the kitchen table, cutting photographs from an old National Geographic and arranging them into a collage about ecosystems. Lyle made soup from what was in the cabinet and a grilled cheese because that was what Tuesday nights had been in this house for 2 years. Routines mattered more than he used to think they did. "Dad," Abby said, not looking up from her scissors. "What happens if somebody doesn't come get a lost thing? Then it goes to the city lost and found, and then what depends on what it is." She thought about this. Does anybody ever just keep a lost thing? Lyle set a bowl in front of her. Not the right people, he said. He had not opened the bag. He had told himself that twice since the afternoon and meant it both times. But after Abby was in bed and the house was quiet, he sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and thought about the pause at the door. About the phone number on the tag connected to a voicemail no one had answered until someone else called back. About a printed signature on a letter authorizing collection of someone else's personal property. He was not a suspicious man by nature. He was the kind of man who assumed the simplest explanation was usually the correct one and acted accordingly. But the pause at the door was not simple. The pause at the door was someone deciding what to say next and choosing to say nothing instead. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. The next morning he called the main number for Hargrove Capital Management and asked to speak with Elliot Cross directly. The receptionist put him on hold for 4 minutes and then connected him to a man whose voice matched the voicemail from 2 days before. Lyle introduced himself and explained that he had the bag and had been prepared to release it to a Mr. Vincent Corley, but had wanted to confirm directly with Mr. Cross before doing so. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that Lyle counted 3 seconds. "Vincent came to collect it," Elliot Cross said, "yesterday afternoon with a letter of authorization." Another pause. "Shorter this time, but heavier, Mr. Barton," Elliot said slowly. "I did not send Vincent to collect that bag." Lyle wrote the sentence down on the notepad beside the phone and read it back to himself. He asked Elliot Cross what he wanted to do. Elliot said he wanted to come himself. He asked if Lyle could hold the bag until the end of the week. Lyle said he could hold it as long as needed. He set the phone down and sat with the notepad for a while. Then he picked it up again and looked at the sentence. "I did not send Vincent to collect that bag." The thing about working in public spaces for 20 years was that you learned to tell the difference between a thing that was out of place and a thing that was supposed to look like it belonged. A bag left neatly on top of a trash can was not abandoned, it was waiting. And a man sent to collect something his employer had not sent him for was not running an errand. He was running something else. Lyle went back to work. He raked the north trail and patched a section of asphalt on the bike path near the east entrance and signed off on the weekly maintenance report. He did not tell anyone about the phone call. There was no one he particularly needed to tell. Elliot Cross arrived on Friday morning at 9:15. He was 60 years old, lean in the way that people are lean when they have been lean their whole lives and not because they worked at it, with gray at the temples and the kind of quiet in his face that Lyle associated with people who had spent decades being responsible for things and had stopped needing to announce it. He was alone. He drove himself a plain sedan and he came through the maintenance gate the same way anyone would, without looking around first. Lyle met him at the door and offered his hand. Elliot shook it. "Thank you for calling me directly," Elliot said. "I mean that." Lyle brought out the bag and set it on the desk. Elliot unzipped it and went through the contents without explaining what he was looking for. Lyle looked out the window at the maintenance yard and let him do it. After 2 minutes, Elliot zipped the bag closed and stood with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes on the middle distance. "It's here," he said, mostly to himself. Then he looked at Lyle. "Everything's here." Lyle asked if he wanted to tell him what was going on and added that he didn't have to. Elliot Cross did not answer immediately. He picked up the bag and set it on the chair beside him and sat down across from Lyle the way someone sits down when they have been standing for a long time. He told Lyle that the bag contained a working copy of an internal financial audit he had commissioned 6 weeks earlier, without telling his board of directors. He told Lyle that Hargrove Capital Management managed a portfolio of charitable endowments on behalf of 14 regional nonprofit organizations, 3 of which focused on pediatric health services in lower-income communities. He said that over the past 22 months, approximately $31 million had been redirected from those endowments through a series of transfer authorizations that bore his digital approval signature, authorizations he had not made and did not recognize. He said he had been building the documentation quietly because the person he suspected of orchestrating the transfers was Vincent Corley, and Vincent had access to every administrative system in the company. A premature accusation without airtight documentation would allow Vincent to move the evidence, discredit the findings, and position the transfers as authorized restructuring decisions made by Elliot himself. Lyle was quiet for a moment. He thought about the pause at the door. He asked Elliot if Vincent knew about the audit. Elliot said he didn't know how much Vincent knew. He said he had not told anyone. But the audit folder was in the bag, and the bag had been left in the park when Elliot stopped to take a call during his morning walk. And when he had gone back for it 20 minutes later, it was gone. "You didn't lock your car?" Lyle asked. Elliot smiled, not with amusement exactly, but with the particular expression of a man acknowledging his own mistake without making excuses for it. "I left it on the bench beside the car when I took the call. I was distracted. By the time I finished the call, I had already driven halfway home before I realized." Lyle looked at the bag. He thought about the weight of it when he first picked it up. He said he needed to tell Elliot something. He told him about the previous Tuesday evening. He told him that after he had placed the bag in the locked cabinet, before he had left for the night, he had checked the zipper to make sure it was secure. And when he had pressed the pull tab to confirm the seal, the zipper had slipped and the bag had opened partially at the top. He had not intended to look, but the folder was there and it was open and the top page was facing up. He had not read the document, he had not touched it, but the header was visible, and the table in the top right corner of the first page had 2 rows of figures he had seen before he understood what he was looking at. He had closed the bag immediately. He had locked the cabinet. He had gone home and made soup and grilled cheese and watched Abby do her homework, and he had told himself it was not his business and that he was a parks employee with a daughter in the 4th grade, and he was not going to carry something into his life that did not belong there. But, he said, he had seen the numbers. And he had seen the column heading above them in plain type that said Children's Endowment Accounts, and the figure in the right column, the one marked Current Balance, was not $31 million. It was $412,000. Elliot Cross sat very still. Lyle said he had no way of knowing what the balance should have been or what the discrepancy meant. He was not a financial person, but he had been a park supervisor for 6 years, and before that he had worked in municipal facilities management for 14. And he knew what an account looked like when the number in it did not match the size of the bucket it was supposed to fill, and that number did not match. He said he was sorry for seeing it. He said he had not known it meant anything until Elliot had walked in the door. Elliot said nothing for a long time. He looked at the bag on the chair. He looked at Lyle. He asked what Lyle needed to know to decide whether he was going to help. Lyle said he needed to know which hospitals. Elliot gave him the names. 3 pediatric programs: Millbrook Children's Medical Center, St. Clair Family Health, and the Eastbrook Pediatric Fund. Lyle was quiet for a moment. Carrie had been treated at Millbrook Children's Medical Center in the last 2 weeks of her life, not as a patient but as the mother of one. Abby had been 6, and she had developed pneumonia the month after Carrie died, a secondary illness the doctors said sometimes followed severe emotional stress in children, and she had spent 4 nights in the pediatric ward at Millbrook. The bill had been larger than Lyle's entire emergency fund. A financial counselor at the hospital had helped him apply for a grant through a charitable endowment program, and the gap had been covered, and Lyle had never asked the name of the fund because he had been too exhausted and too grateful to think about anything, beyond the fact that Abby was coming home. He looked at the window. He looked at the maintenance yard, the cottonwood trees at the edge of the lot moving slowly in the October wind. He said he would help. Elliot's legal team was a firm called Ardmore & Voss, downtown 14th floor, the kind of office where the coffee came in real cups, and the chairs were the kind that were actually comfortable because the people who sat in them sometimes made decisions that lasted years. Lyle came in on a Thursday afternoon. Abby was with her aunt that day, Carrie's sister, who lived 20 minutes away, and who came by on Thursdays sometimes because she missed Abby, and because she and Lyle had an unspoken agreement about the fact that Abby needed more people in her life than just him. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia, Lyle was not given her last name initially, asked him to describe in sequence what he had observed, beginning with finding the bag and ending with his conversation with Elliot Cross. She asked him not to characterize or interpret. She asked him to describe only what he had directly seen and heard. He did. She asked whether he had told anyone else what he had seen in the folder. He said he had not. She asked whether he had been contacted by anyone from Hargrove Capital Management other than Vincent Corley and Elliot Cross. He said he had not. She asked him to wait. She left the room for 12 minutes. When she came back, she had Elliot Cross with her and a second attorney Lyle had not met. She sat down and told Lyle that his account, combined with the digital audit trail and the server records they had recovered in the previous 72 hours, was enough to file. She said that Vincent Corley had anticipated an inside challenge and had built a contingency argument based on claiming that Elliot had authorized the transfers verbally and informally, documentation that had simply not been created in the standard way. The argument was designed to create ambiguity. An independent witness with no internal stake and no professional relationship with any party at the firm would dismantle the ambiguity before it could be argued. She told Lyle what she needed from him, a sworn statement notarized describing the bag, the condition it was found in, the date and time, the contents visible when the zipper opened, and the specific text he had seen. Not inference, not interpretation, only what was in front of him. Lyle said he would do it. She asked if he had any questions about what he was agreeing to. He thought about it. Then he said he had one. He asked whether any of the 3 pediatric programs had already reduced services because of the missing funds. The second attorney opened a folder and slid a single printed page across the table. Lyle read the first paragraph and set it face down. He said he was ready to start. Vincent Corley's legal team moved first, filing a motion to exclude Lyle's statement on the grounds that he lacked professional qualifications to interpret financial documentation and that his account constituted an unlawful viewing of proprietary records by an unauthorized third party. The motion was detailed and technically constructed and would have complicated the proceedings significantly if it had been the only obstacle in front of them. It was not. The emergency review before the Board of Trustees of Hargrove Capital Management convened on a Monday morning at 8:45 in a conference room on the 31st floor of the main office building. 12 trustees were seated at the long table. Vincent Corley sat on the right side with his legal team. He was dressed carefully, and his expression was the careful neutral of a man who believed the math still favored him. Lyle sat in the witness chair at the near end of the table. He had Abby's school photo in his shirt pocket, which was not something he had planned or thought about. He had just picked it up off the kitchen counter that morning when he was putting his things together, and it had gone into his pocket without a decision being made about it. Vincent's lead attorney stood and addressed the board in the tone of someone laying out terms. The individual before you today is a municipal groundskeeper with no financial background, no professional standing in the matters under review, and no basis for testifying about documents he was not authorized to read. His presence here is a procedural irregularity, and his statement should be treated accordingly. Lyle looked at the attorney for a moment. Then he said in the same voice he used when he explained park rules to teenagers who did not want to hear them, "I didn't need a financial license to read a column heading and a number. I only needed to be able to read." One of the trustees at the far end of the table set down her pen. Elliot Cross stood at the head of the table and presented the evidence in sequence. First, the complete internal audit independently verified by the external firm contracted 3 weeks prior. Second, the digital transfer authorization records covering 22 months, each bearing Vincent Corley's administrative login credentials, alongside a forged secondary approval code generated from Elliot's account profile, which the firm's IT security consultant had been able to trace to a remote access session originating from Vincent's company-issued device. Third, a series of emails recovered from the backup server between Vincent Corley and a financial intermediary in the Cayman Islands, most recent sent 5 days before Lyle found the bag in the park. The final line of the last email read, "Get everything cleared before the end of the month, no trail." The board chair printed a copy of that email and placed it in front of Vincent Corley. Vincent did not speak. His attorney began a sentence and did not finish it. The board chair asked Vincent to step outside while the independent review team began the formal assessment. 2 building security officers positioned themselves at either side of the conference room door. Vincent stood. He straightened his jacket. He walked the length of the table. He passed the chair where Lyle was sitting, and he did not look at him, and he did not say anything. He went out and the door closed behind him, and the room was very quiet for a moment. The story was on the local news by noon and the national business outlets by 3 in the afternoon. The number that appeared in the headlines, $31 million, was the amount that had been redirected. The number that appeared in the follow-up reporting, the one Lyle read on his phone while eating a sandwich in his truck before his afternoon shift, was different. It was the amount that had already been returned by the time the markets closed. 100% of the redirected funds recovered from the Cayman account before it could be moved again, because Elliot's team had gotten a court order in the window between Monday morning and the end of business that afternoon. Lyle's name appeared in the coverage before he knew it was going to. A reporter found him the next morning at the park. He was clearing leaves from the drainage grate near the north entrance. The reporter asked what it felt like to be the person who had stopped $31 million from disappearing from children's hospitals. Lyle thought about that for a moment. He said he had found a bag on a trash can and called the number on the tag. He said that was it. The reporter asked if he considered himself a hero. He said he did not think the word applied. He picked up his equipment and went back to the drainage grate. Abby heard about it at school. Her teacher had shown the class a brief article. When Abby came home that afternoon, she sat down at the kitchen table and looked at him across it for a while without speaking. Then she said, "People at school think you did something big." Lyle poured her a glass of milk. "People make things bigger than they are. Did you do something big?" He considered the question honestly. "I returned something that wasn't mine and told the truth about what I'd accidentally seen. That's a regular-sized thing." Abby thought about this. "It doesn't feel regular-sized." "No," Lyle said. "Sometimes it doesn't." She drank her milk and went to work on her homework. Lyle stood at the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the yard, at the oak tree Carrie had planted the spring they moved in, which was almost as tall as the roofline now. Elliot Cross came to the park one more time, on a Saturday morning in November when the light was the particular pale gold that happens in late autumn in the Midwest. The kind of light that doesn't warm anything but makes everything look like it's being remembered correctly. He came through the east gate on foot and found Lyle near the cottonwood stand at the north end of the park, repairing a section of split-rail fence that had been damaged when a branch came down in the previous week's storm. He stood at a polite distance until Lyle set down his tools and turned. "I wanted to say something in person," Elliot said. "Not through the attorneys." Lyle waited. "The settlement from Vincent's prosecution," Elliot said. "A portion of the legal recovery goes to affected parties. I spoke with the board about designating a part of it to strengthen the endowment structure of all 3 pediatric programs, make the funding a structural allocation rather than a discretionary grant, not dependent on annual review, not subject to reauthorization." Lyle nodded slowly. "The board agreed," Elliot said. "It takes effect in January." Lyle said that was good. He meant it simply without ceremony, and Elliot seemed to understand that was the right register for it. Elliot looked at the fence section Lyle had been working on, at the fresh wood of the new rail against the weathered gray of the old posts. Then he looked at the park itself, the cottonwoods, the gray sky, the one bench near the east path where the light hit it longest in the afternoon. "You didn't have to call me," he said. "You could have given the bag to Vincent and that would have been the end of it. He might even have left you something for the trouble." "He would have," Lyle said. "But you didn't. No, why?" Lyle picked up the rail he had set down and fitted it back into the bracket and tightened the bolt. He looked at the fence for a moment, making sure the level was right. "Because the bag wasn't his," he said, "and the money wasn't his either, and it's not complicated when you say it that way." Elliot was quiet for a moment, then he said, "No, I don't suppose it is." He offered his hand. Lyle shook it. Elliot went back the way he had come, through the east gate, and Lyle listened to his footsteps on the path until they faded and then went back to the fence. That afternoon when Abby came to meet him at the end of his shift, she brought a drawing she had made in class that week, a crayon picture of a park, green and yellow and brown, with a fence on one side and a tree in the middle and 2 small figures standing near a bench. She gave it to him without explanation and climbed into the truck bed to ride the 20 feet to the parking lot exit, the way she had been doing since she was small and he had never had the heart to stop it. Lyle looked at the drawing for a moment before he started the truck. On the fence in the picture, Abby had drawn each rail separately, careful and even, the way a child draws something she has watched someone else fix and found worth remembering. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket. He started the truck, he went home, he made dinner. He checked the door bolt and listened to Abby read aloud from her book until she fell asleep, and then he sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of the house and drank his coffee and did not feel like a hero, which was exactly right, because that was never what this had been about. He had found a bag on a trash can. He had called the number on the tag. He had told the truth when someone with money and leverage came to buy his silence, and he had declined the sale. He had sat in a conference room and described what he had seen and only what he had seen and then gone back to work. In a city where $31 million had been disappearing from the children who needed it most, One man in a faded Parks Department jacket had simply refused to look the other way. Not because he was exceptional, not because he had a plan, but because the thing in front of him was wrong and he was the person standing in front of it, and there was no one else he was going to hand that off to. He rinsed his coffee cup, he turned off the kitchen light, he went down the hall and checked that Abby's hall light was on. It was. He went to bed.